The dawn of civilization. Primitive. Dangerous. Exciting. The handwriting is on the wall. If the human race is ever going to amount to anything, it needs
the most civilized caveman I have ever seen.
Look who's come out of his cave.
Hey everyone, this is James from Cave Dweller Music. We've got another podcast episode, and my co-host Brendan is with me as usual. Today we have Ryan Clackner of the label Moonlight Cypress Archetypes, as well as a number of projects. Thanks for coming on the show. It's great to have you.
Hello, yeah, thanks. It's great to be here with you.
So we're going to go through, obviously, the label and talk about a bunch of your projects. But just firstly, do you want to tell everyone sort of a little bit about you and Moonlight Cypress Archetypes?
Yeah, so Moonlight basically is an umbrella that will kind of serve as a ever-expanding brainchild to harbor these projects, which are really largely hard to describe and don't really sit very well in any formal genre, but they are loosely connected by three main pillars, which would be metal. Black metal is probably more obvious, but it's not in any way exclusive to black metal. Then we would have country music, which would probably, to a metal listener, be the most obvious thing that stands out to them. The breakdown is, for me, going to lean a little bit more towards what we call old-time music here, which would be, you would recognize it like the banjos in Primeval Well and stuff like that. So not specifically country music in, maybe you would think a Johnny Cash context, but then again, it's not that either, because Stumptail definitely goes hard in that direction. It
kind of reminded me a little bit of, the band Panopticon?
Yeah.
Yeah, like with combining the more extreme stuff with that sort of country banjo music from the South.
Yeah, like that is probably a little bit more, and they're almost doing something where it's like folk, like right. A generalized folk on instruments that are associated with American old-time music. Whereas like something like Primeval, for example, is literally just lifting melodies straight out of that world and then recontextualizing them. And also occasionally using the actual instrumentation. Whereas Stumptail is like, it's straight up like Jerry Reed country music at times, like a direct, obvious nod to him. So there's two. And the third kind of pillar, if you will, would be, again, as loosely as the other two, jazz. And specifically more modern kinds of jazz, like Spintria, for example, that
was one of my favorites.
Yeah,
right. Like just total free jazz, for lack of a better term, even though it's obviously pretty spread out and extended from that actual root source. But I mean, what would I call it though? Like if I was to tell a stranger, yeah, it's like, it's avant-garde metal. Like, but what does that even mean anyway? Like, I mean, for people that are over 35, that means one thing. And for internet kids, that means something else altogether. And I don't know what it means to either of those people anymore,
Right.
So
yeah, you had that jazz in Arcane Marrow as well, in a different form.
It's in it in all of it.
Yeah.
Here's an idea that really sank into my head and became very important to me somewhere early on in the writing process. And that idea was to utilize that vocabulary and that genres, what some people anyway would call musical information, all right, and put that in a different context so that it doesn't come out sounding like prog metal, prog rock, right. Whatever. All right. So I avoid that like at all costs, but it is absolutely like a part of what we're doing. Like my writing, my playing, it's just jazz, but I buried it so that it doesn't come out having a prog feel. It's just kind of like really weird, hard to describe.
It's good. Yeah. It's like, like John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman did acid, and then like started playing the Ouija board, and then
have either of you ever heard that that YouTube mashup that some psycho made a few years back, where it was like late era Coltrane superimposed over a Sun song?
No,
The drum,
No.
the drone. I mean, dude, it's like a 15-minute. They were like perfectly timed together, and I first heard it 6 or 7 years ago, and I was like, this is like life changing.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Oh, it's got like 2 million views on it now.
Wow.
Because so many people were like, man, this is like brilliant. You know, and of course there's bands like Imperial Triumphant and Gorguts and like whatever, like there's been people who have taken that kind of shit, and I feel like it airs towards the, you know, classical side, or specifically modern classical or 20th century classical, contemporary music, whatever you want to call it, new music. And I don't really feel like somebody took an actual just straight up like 1960s and beyond jazz vocabulary and really successfully integrated it into metal. I don't think anyone ever did it with country music either, and I don't think anyone was foolish and crazy enough to come along and try to merge all three of them. But somewhere along the line, that idea got into my head, and it has just, for better or worse, taken over my life, basically.
If you haven't listened to Escape and Wormlust, you got to check that out.
I have listened to some of it, but it's been a while. I remember some of that stuff coming out a few years back, but
yeah, so it's up your alley, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say your output's been pretty prolific in a very short period of time. So I wanted to kind of ask, have these been projects you kind of had in the works in your mind for a long time, or was it just like one idea comes along and that's what you put out, and then the next one, and then the next one, just as it flows?
I had the idea for Stumptail starting, man, like close to 20 years ago. I'm 38. I graduated college in 2005. And when I was still in school, I can remember drunkenly walking to the bars and kind of brainstorming some of this shit. I remember, so I was a jazz major in college. I'm a music major. And I remember getting, people like at my house partying and thinking that this like changing CDs business, like it takes too long. And like, you need to do this. Somebody needs to come along and like make this stuff come together. So that one, to answer your question, has been kind of sitting there and germinating for a long time. Mm-hmm. Primeval Well is a few years old now. And then the other ones like Vile Haint, that came together right in the beginning of the pandemic, and Arcane Marrow, it basically was just like a pile of riffs that some of them were dissonant and some of them weren't. And I realized that I was kind of painting myself into a corner that I didn't necessarily want to get stuck in, of, the most just experimental possible shit. And I wanted to see if I could like, write a riff, like an actual fucking riff, and not only operate in really just super dissonant out there kind of spaces, if that makes sense. So I kind of just saw them as an A-B. They started at the same time. It's the same people. It's just me and my drummer, Zach. And we recorded them both like a year ago in the pandemic. And we actually recorded a second Vile Haint album, which we'll release on Moonlight next year sometime. And then we did Primeval after that, and Devil's Looking Glass, which is a kind of loosely solo thing. It's just me, but so I guess it's not loosely solo. It is solo, but I'm not going to call it like a solo project. You know what I mean? Like, I hate all that shit. And I hate that term project too, by the way. It's like, that has nothing to do with this. It's just some weird pet peeve of mine. Like, I can't say project without quotations, doing quotation hands.
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things where people use it for lack of a better term. It's like, if it's less than two people, it's a project type thing. Otherwise, it's a band.
Right.
Yeah. I'm the same way with compilation. I feel like it seems so cheesy.
Right.
You know, like, oh, he got the compilation album, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, like, what else do you call it?
I don't know. It's like a buzzword thing. I have this like unreasonable hatred for buzzwords. I don't know. It's just a thing.
I feel like it's kind of the same with the terms avant-garde and prog as well. It's those are like blanket terms people use to describe music that they don't know how to quite put into it.
But it becomes kitschy and popular, and then it generates these really annoying internet buzzes that I don't know. The whole. I feel like people are prone. It's a human nature tendency to go towards buzzwords, but it's even more so now with the internet. It's just become kind of an absurdity at some time, you know, in some ways. But anyway, I digress badly. So we spent. Okay, so, God, I have to apologize. I'm like hideously long-winded a lot of the time.
It's okay.
You know, that's why all the songs are like 10 fucking minutes. You know what I'm saying? Like that's, okay. Me being long-winded, like that's why Spintria had to exist, because I just was like, I need to be able to, like, I have to have a thing where I can just do these like 4-minute long guitar solos. So like I can actually get out everything that I'm trying to. But also, I mean, you know, that is also why there's just so many bands, because it's like, okay, I could just like call Moonlight Cypress Archetypes a band and just, you know, put out a different sounding album for every album, and no one will ever know what it is or what's coming or whatever. But I just felt like it would actually help me organize my thoughts if I could attempt to tailor them to certain specific themes that have nothing necessarily to do with genre so much as noticing similarities in any given set of riffs. Like, for example, I do think, and I could just be, you know, blowing smoke up my own ass, but I do think that Vile Haint and Arcane Marrow sound considerably different while still both obviously being black metal bands. And I do think that they are both pretty rigorously distinct from Primeval and certainly from Stumptail. So, you know, like, also last year with the pandemic happening a year and change ago, I, for the most part, lost my jobs and just was able to actually just sit down and write, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how things were in England, but here it was like just very much like total pandemonium. Nobody really knew what they definitely still don't know what to fucking do, but back then it was new, you know?
That's the exact same scenario that our site was born out of, because I'm actually living in San Diego, and I went through the green card process starting April last year, which was like the worst timing in history to immigrate. And I couldn't work right through from April last year to April this year. So it's like I have to create something, and that's how this all happened.
Right. That's well, okay. So we had talked about starting some kind of record label thing 4 or 5 years down the line or whatever, but it just, you know, as you said, it just kind of happened. It just fell apart. Mm-hmm. The world fell apart, and something else fell into my lap. There was a lot of music, there was a lot of time, and I had I have a lot of energy. I have a hard time sitting still. So it just kind of fell in place. And I mean, to be clear, guys, I didn't know how to use a computer last year. Okay. Like, I didn't know how to get into Zoom to do this, because I'm kind of a tech dunce, not kind of, like, I'm a complete total tech dunce. So this whole year has been kind of a massive learning curve in terms of learning about marketing, recording. You know, like, I realized at a certain point we'd had a bunch of albums recorded, like Vile Haint and Arcane Marrow, whatever else, Primeval and Devil's Looking Glass, like all that shit was done by the fall, like almost a year ago. And I remember having to be like, I don't actually know how to put this on the internet. Like, I don't know how to give this to people. Like, I don't know how to place an order. Like, I don't know, like graphic design, like, oh man, it's been kind of a lot. It's been pretty insane trying to, that has been much, much, much harder and more taxing and stressful than writing and recording music, to be completely honest with you.
Are you making your own art and all that stuff, like for your
Yes.
design?
Yeah, we've done it all. We've done everything ourselves.
That's sick.
Yeah, it looks fantastic, and you got a lot of variety.
Thanks. Well, I mean, to be honest, like we just like Primeval was kind of set in stone. Like there was like a little bit of branding kind of thought there already, but like Stumptail, Stumptail, if you look at the social media pages between the two and just A/B them, it's, Stumptail's like everything is just, it's sort of similar, but it's more focused on like literal country. I don't know if tropes is the right word, but that sort of thinking, like just kind of, these are like scenes of Knoxville, like right here, like what's just right around South Knox where I live, and just the kind of shenanigans that people get up to around here. And it's all very summery, like it's summer-y, like the season summer. Because that's just what the music sounds like to me. I just kind of think of it as like the daylight version of Primeval Well, and it has a definite surreal element to it, a kind of surrealist, which I kind of feel like is sort of prevalent in all of it. Like it's like I actually really felt like calling any of this shit avant-garde was like really kind of doing it a disservice, and that really a better term for all of it is surrealist. But like in terms of like, how do you explain that to somebody? Because people are so attached to the hallucination that a word creates in their mind. They're so dependent on that if you said surrealist black metal, they would think of Monet paintings and Burzum, and they would go, like I can't handle it, there'd be no either that, or like maybe they would think of David Lynch or something like that, which somebody, I can't remember, somebody somewhere along the line said, compared one of these albums in some loose way to David Lynch. And I thought, man, that actually is really brilliant, because that kind of is unintentionally what's happening, this sort of nightmarish, weird take on America. You know what I mean? And American things. But anyhow.
And he also, everything he did was always very unique and different as well throughout his career. So, I mean, there's that comparison too, I guess. Yeah,
very American, but very surreal, and not tainted by a lot of bullshit either. Even in the surreal elements, there doesn't seem to be a value judgment or like a, hey, look at me, I'm making this cheeky statement about my fucking country because I'm so fucking clever or whatever. Like, it's just, like, this is it. This is like Twin Peaks, for better or worse. And also they do this really weird shit out in the woods.
No, I have never actually watched Twin Peaks. I feel like I've done myself a disservice by not doing so.
Oh, well, I mean, I haven't. I've gone through the whole thing twice and seen a bunch of the movies, and it's, for me, I love them. Like, I get totally lost in pretty much everything I've seen from him. But I think he's a very interesting person. Like, I've watched documentaries about him too, and I do relate very much to his general attitude, which in a way is hard to grasp, but at the same time is very productive and doesn't, as far as I can tell, seem to have any given agenda other than to create. And to just let whatever is in his imagination come out, and it just kind of spills out into a somewhat 1950s-ish, but also somehow equally modern American. It's almost like a kaleidoscope, like in slow-mo or something, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's sort of how it registers in my mind.
So just touching on something you mentioned before about how each project sort of has its own essence.
Yeah.
I did actually notice as well, like when you go through the Bandcamp profiles for each one, it's not just like the artwork, the whole feel from the pictures down the sides to the logos to the color schemes.
Yeah.
Everything has a very unique, like standalone feeling to it, which I like. I mean, I appreciate that. It kind of captures the essence of the project itself.
Yeah. To be honest again with you, I do them like a half an hour before the album drops. And I'm like, man, I don't know what colors I've used yet and which ones I haven't. I just throw that stuff up there and compare it to the other ones. Like Spintria, for example, like I kind of went with that red wine-ish sort of color. And, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but a Spintria is a brothel coin from ancient Rome. So that's why we went with that image in the logo. And
yeah, I was wondering about that. Are you a bit of a history buff, or?
I think that would be somewhat grandiose if I said yes. I am definitely a person who is very interested in history, though I wouldn't say that I know very much about it, if that makes sense. Okay.
And like what sort of areas are you like interested in? Obviously Rome seems to be one of them. Anything else that sort of captures your interest?
Oh yeah, early America and pre-Christian Europe for sure, and any kind of world mythology, particularly any sort of tales that I can find from any place around the globe that has some sort of polytheistic nature. Okay. Which largely it really is all of them. So I guess you could say comparative mythology and comparative religion.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any favorites to recommend?
Any books stories? Or no, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I started with this stuff the same way a lot of people do, which is with Joseph Campbell, who I think for Americans and modern people in general is a great place to start because he's easy to read. It's not taxing generally to read it. It's like pretty exciting, and you can kind of get a feel for the myth itself and the stories themselves. And then I also, when I'm done working at night, a lot of the time I'll just watch some kind of history documentary or whatever on Netflix or Prime or whatever. Like I'm watching this one now that's about early America. And I wouldn't call it a documentary by any means. It's on Netflix. So, you got to treat it like it's at least 50% bullshit, but it's still, I would say that I probably am not so much a history buff as much as I seek these, they're like myth is a really interesting area. You can focus on the historical aspect of all of that shit until the cows come home, and nothing about the myth itself will really present itself to you until you can find some way that it relates to you in your personal life, and you find the animating principle, the energy behind it. And I feel like that's where the whole idea about calling this thing, this label, archetypes, like that's kind of misleading. You know what I mean? That's like also a nod to Carl Jung and archetypal psychology, which is a thing that was founded by a post-Jungian psychologist named James Hillman. And the whole subject of what archetypes is like vast and confusing. And I also don't feel comfortable saying I know a lot about it. I look mainly not so much to history as a scientific discipline as much as something that's going to inspire me to write and move me as a human. And I feel like that's what mythology does. And it's practically given, for me anyway, at this point, that any myth that I read from anywhere around the world will set something off in my imagination and like very well could just lead to more writing, which at this point, writing is like, it wasn't always about the writing. I spent a lot of time being completely obsessed with guitar playing and wanting to be, a hot shit guitar picker. that has kind of largely left, it seems, and it's switched to writing and the like mythology, history, and particularly where they kind of come together seems to like really excite that. It's also, somebody like Lynch, like there is a definite 1950s mythology of America, like I think we all kind of can conjure up images pretty quickly of what that means. So like that's something that he uses, whereas for me it'd be something more like stories about the South or about New York jazz or about pre-Christian European stuff or whatever. And they because this is all in my imagination, I can merge them together. It doesn't have to be real. It doesn't have to be quote unquote historical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Like none of this is real. Like in like a, well, this is real black metal or this is real country or this is real jazz or whatever. Like none of it's real. That shit's done. The 20th century is done. That shit died in the 20th century. Like I don't want to be like the bearer of bad news, but like it's gone, that stuff's gone. I think as far as I can tell, like the conditions that created it are gone.
Right.
That place, that time is done.
Yeah. I mean,
blues,
there were very specific factors that were involved in forging each of those genres in their birthplace.
Yeah. And most of the time, the people who were involved have no problem constantly fucking reminding you of that and constantly reminding you that it's done.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah,
So,
you see that especially a lot with black metal musicians from the 80s and 90s. And I've seen so many interviews with people from those bands saying black metal's dead and what you're playing now is a mirror imitation type thing. So it's jazz. I mean, people have been saying jazz is dead for 50 years now. Like since free jazz, they've been saying free jazz killed jazz since the like mid 60s. And they're probably right. Mm-hmm. But it's like there's still a lot out there. Like, I don't know. I've had this discussion with a few people, and some people disagree with me, some people agree. I'm probably going to annoy some people saying this, but I feel like hard rock in the 80s killed rock and roll to some extent. Like you had the 60s and 70s was that constant progression and pushing the boundaries. When you look at stuff like prog rock from back then and like psychedelic rock and art rock and all that stuff, and then you hit hard rock in the 80s and you get stuff like Guns N' Roses and who am I thinking of? That did Shout at the Devil, Motley Crue and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And the creativity and the boundary pushing just completely goes out the window. And you've just got all these bands.
Cocaine and beer.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's like they're all chart toppers, but all of them sound the same. And there's no like real difference between them. And then it becomes the most popular genre in the world. It explodes. Everyone's listening to it. And then it kind of just starts to crumble. And then hip hop starts to rise, and hip hop's the genre, like the boundary pushing genre, and that's a lot of people shift over to that because, like, well, they're doing something exciting and interesting. But I saw a really interesting article as well with Jay-Z, who said that grunge actually held hip hop back culturally about 3 or 4 years. With like Nirvana in particular, hip hop was on the rise. It was starting to become the dominant genre in radio, I guess, or in popular music, and then grunge happened. And people just became obsessed with Nirvana's sound. And then once Kurt Cobain died and that popularity died down with grunge and that kind of faded out, then hip hop kind of took its place as, I guess, culturally one of the most dominant genres. But I mean, like, it's a complicated topic because genres don't die, genres don't go away. It's just there's a waning, like, it's an ebb and flow of popularity. But I thought it was an interesting take, at least.
Sure. Well, I mean, in the rise of rock, largely had to coincide with the cultural popular level death, if you will, of jazz, because prior to that jazz was rock, right? So you had people back in the 50s and 60s that Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, they were as famous as Elvis at one point, and they were like, what when Elvis became gigantic, it was like what is this? Like, what is this? This is garbage. What? I can't personally, and you're obviously free to disagree and see it otherwise, but I just personally cannot help but see it as like just a long-term slide that went from American families. They listen to jazz, they listen to classical music, they listen to some regional music, like people here would, probably listen to bluegrass and something along those lines. But now we have slid there's no denying that like the cultural output has slid down a scale measurably for like a really long time now. And what's popular now, it's pretty bad. I don't know if it started with Guns N' Roses or not, but like, I mean, any of those, I mean, a lot of people used to blame this shit on Elvis and his dance moves, right? like saying that's really where it all started. But I can remember reading, like these interviews with Frank Zappa, and he would say, back in the 60s and the 70s, you'd have the fat cats with their cigars in the back rooms at MCA or RCA or whatever the fucking big record label was back in the day, Warner Brothers. And, and they would say, well, shit, I mean, I don't know who this Black Sabbath bullshit is, but maybe the kids will like it. Give them, $5,000 and tell them to make an album and, throw it out there. And, there it is. There's Black Sabbath. And now, they won't do it. And he was complaining about this in his own lifetime. And I don't remember when he died, but it was at least, I think, 20 years ago. And I think it's gotten probably a lot worse out there since then.
Are you talking about like taking a chance on something that may not be commercially popular or?
And putting a commercially viable amount of money behind it. Yes. Yeah,
right.
So in other words, taking something that wouldn't necessarily be obvious, but still, quote unquote, giving it a chance,
I think you are correct. It is it's a lot more profit margin focused these days, I guess. And it's not even just profit margin focused, it's stream focused because everything's measured, like metrics are measured in streams now.
I mean, I think it's like that even in like supposedly underground things like black metal, like, you know what I mean? Like it's gotten really weird, man. Like I have a very kind of love-hate relationship, mostly hate with social media and streaming and the idea of business as it relates to music. It seems to be a largely, I was going to say impossible, but difficult is probably a more truthful task to grapple with it and keep your wits about you and not get totally insanely depressed. You know what I mean?
But I guess like it's a double-edged sword because you've got the negative aspects that you were talking about with all that stuff, but the positive aspect is that you have these completely niche, obscure projects and bands that would find it very difficult to reach an audience that connects with them without that stuff happening. I mean, there were always ways in the past, but it's made it much easier for those people to find like-minded individuals who connect with their project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about, the old days with people talking about old blues artists or something in the 1920s who made a living on it from going from one house party to the next across the Deep South and black metal tape trading. And, there's always been ways. I personally, on a good day, I share your sentiment. And on a bad day, I struggle with the idea of putting music out there and just kind of feeling like it's just falling on deaf ears, I guess. And, this music that I'm doing anyway is decidedly not trendy. It's very niche. For better or worse, good, bad, or otherwise, it is what it is. It's unusual music. It's hard to categorize. And at times, it is pretty extreme. So
yeah,
it is. It
is all the fun stuff, the marks.
Right. I kind of feel like, okay. So like to touch back to what I was saying about the, the mainstream music and versus some, all right, like the split in the 50s, for example, from jazz and so-called popular music, which eventually became rock and R&B and rap and all the rest of it that we know now. I feel like one of the things that happened that can be kind of corrected or whatever is that, especially it started arguably with bebop, but went for sure by the time free jazz became a thing, that the music became too much for people who weren't musicians, which I think is an error, like on our end, on the musicians' part. Like if the people can't listen to this shit and make some sense out of it and can't get some idea of what the artist is going for, like, I don't, it seems to be kind of too self-serving and self-interested or whatever. Right. So the goal with like Moonlight, for example, is to try to take ideas that are, like I said earlier, proggy, but or whatever, you call it jazz, call it prog, whatever, I don't care. It's that stuff mixed with something like black metal and country music. And like, I don't know, it's kind of totally insane in a way, but also the goal is to try to keep it kind of grounded and up in the clouds at the same time. I feel like that's an honest statement as to what people are. People have their feet on their ground and their heads in the clouds, pretty much all of us all the time somehow. And I try to use the kind of folk and country elements to ground it, the metal elements to energize it, and the more jazz, classical, prog, whatever elements to color it in ways that I haven't seen other people do, that I think are moving to me and more accurately get my point across, which could be done like without any of my fucking ranting. You're right. Like, my goal is like, you should be able to listen to what I'm putting out and understand and you hopefully feel it and get something from it, and it produces some sort of response in you other than like, oh yes, this is excellent Scandinavian second wave, like whatever. Like, I don't care about that stuff. Like, like I want to like create an actual reaction in the person deeper than gentle intellectual / ego stimulation or something, if that makes sense.
Well, I think like that's the strength of your projects in that case, because you're achieving what you want to do with your goals and your reasons behind it, but it's not completely self-serving because ultimately you're trying to connect with the listener.
I mean, I am. Yeah. At this point, yes, definitely.
Because you have, I mean, there's certain, it's specific within genres to some extent, but there are just bands out there that, like you said, with free jazz, self-serving, it's created for the person because they want to make it. They don't care if the listener connected or feels anything.
I think that's true in black metal and a lot of stuff, man. Like that's a very 20th century attitude that came up with the rise of like avant-garde things,
Yeah. I think that this whole genre is like kind of like that. Like, to some extent, I feel like harsh noise is a very self-serving genre. I mean, it's not one of those things that a lot of people like listen to that and be like, oh, this really makes me feel something. It's the artist, I want to make this because this is, I think is awesome type thing. I'm okay with listening to that for that reason. I love harsh noise, but I can accept the fact that a lot of the projects out there are very self-serving.
Sure. I think that's kind of also a natural byproduct of the modern, like ultra modern, like right now thing happening where we don't really know what's going to come of anything anymore. So people are just, I think if I might speak for a lot of artists as a whole of no specific genre, they just feel like, fuck it. Like, what's the difference? Like, I don't know if anyone's ever going to hear this or not. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And just a kind of generalized fuck it attitude, which I think would have been considered pretty abhorrent back in 70 or 80 years ago, is now more or less prevalent. It seems to me anyway.
Well, I mean, I understand exactly where it's coming from. It's the fact that if you don't know that people are going to even like hear it or care when they hear it, you might as well make something that makes you happy personally and that you feel you've accomplished what you want to accomplish.
Sure. Which is not unreasonable.
No, not at all. It's tough. I mean, it's like you said, it's a very weird time in history for humanity and music. Very weird. The world is a very strange place right now, and it's changing at like the fastest rate it's ever changed in human history.
It's pretty weird. It's pretty weird out there. I don't really know even how to check the pulse on it anymore, really. But I do know I can get lost in worrying about it, or I can focus on what like insanely small amount I can control, which is practically none of it, because that definitely doesn't include me a lot of the time. But I can at least like commit myself to writing, to the overall vision of Moonlight, to extrapolating it as much as possible, to expanding upon it, to making it better, to like learn about better recording techniques and, you know, whatever, just try to not be suicidal and all that, you know.
I guess like you kind of have to look at it from the positive side of things, in that there's been an improvement in the standard of, like, you know, of life for the average person that's never been seen before. That's increased at like well, I mean, it's kind of a tipping point now where it's declining. But for the last 30, 50 years, the average standard of living for the average person has just been phenomenal in a lot of countries compared to every other point in history. But what comes with that is that rapid cultural change, which is what we're talking about here. Because you can't really have that technological change without the cultural change sort of having to keep pace with it to some extent.
I know what you're saying. I think for me personally, my life is so materialistically comfortable that I fall into these traps where, like, if I feel a little bit of anxiety about something, I immediately go into these large-scale existential freakouts that I feel like I have to take seriously because they're happening in my mind, which has largely proven to be untrue in reality. The trick is, for me, is that, like, I know that that's in this, that music falls into my skull the same way ridiculous thinking does. And so it's a challenge sometimes to discern which is worth pursuing and which is not. But again, to try to at least sound like a sane person, I know that I can only do so much. And so a lot of like Moonlight was really just saying, I don't know what's happening in the world, but I'm not working right now a job, quote unquote. I'm working my ass off, but we have these albums, this music, more of it's coming. Like I plotted out a timeline for 2022, and like if all goes as planned, and I'm hoping that it can, and I'm hoping I can sustain all this, like we're actually going to put out 11 albums next year, which is
that's
like
impressive. Wow.
Like
all EPs or
yeah. Like, so there's Vile Haint 2 is ready. Arcane Marrow 2 is recorded. I'll do another Devil's Looking Glass, which is the dark folk thing. We started, the guy that plays keyboards for Primeval and Spintria, his name is Edward. We started a thing. We both really big classical music fans and have been for a long time. And we joked about starting a project based on Stravinsky, which I'm not sure if either of y'all are familiar with him, but he was a Russian classical composer. He was very famous in his lifetime. I guess his most famous piece is The Rite of Spring. And when he premiered it in Paris, and I believe 1913, but it could be a different year. I can't recall exactly. They rioted. And I think it's the only time in classical music history that people reacted so strongly to something like that. And so we joked about saying, like, man, we should, like, create this thing where it's a quote unquote symphonic black metal thing, where instead of going the Dimmu route or whatever, we take influence from Stravinsky, like real classical music, especially dissonant stuff. So that's happening. That thing is done, almost done anyway. That's going to have like oboes and cellos and all kinds of shit on it.
Are you going to play those, or are they going to be digitally done, or are you going to bring people in?
No, we're doing it ourselves with MIDI. We got a really nice MIDI thing. So so like I played guitar, I'll do the vocals, I'll do bass and whatever. And we got an outside drummer to play drums on that. Uh-huh. And then we will program all this stuff. And if we end up sticking it out, then in the future, more than likely we'll get actual humans to play the so-called classical parts. Yeah.
So I had a question for you, because we've got about 15 minutes left of time. I wanted to ask, is Moonlight Cypress Archetypes always going to be sort of the output for just your music, or are you ever looking at taking on other acts on the label?
I planned that for this year and next year that it would just be my stuff, and after that, then I can kind of assess and see. It does seem like it would be really cool to expand it out from just my own stuff. I just don't really feel like I could do anything worthwhile for anybody else yet, if that makes sense. Like I don't feel like it's like it. I just don't think it's there yet in terms of visibility.
One of those things that it kind of seems to naturally progress for some people. Like, are you familiar with Cursed Monk Records?
Yeah.
Roger, we had Roger on the show a little while back, and he was telling us he originally just started it as an output source for his own music. It was never actually intended to even be a label for other bands.
Right.
And he just started having people contact him and be like, "Hey, can we jump on your label? We like your music." So yeah, I mean, you never know. It might just be one of those things that naturally evolves for you at some point.
Yeah, I think my idea on that is, like I said, just give it a little bit more time and see if people start to materialize who are doing something that's relatively similar. Like I wouldn't want to just like release a traditional, if I could use that word, traditional black metal band or whatever. Like it just seems kind of like what would it do for them? What would it do for me? I don't know. It seems kind of silly, but if there were people that were doing like-minded things, I think that would be pretty cool, actually. Yeah. Again, you don't want to force it. If it happens naturally, then great. If not, then at least you still got an output source with your specific material. Right.
Before we wrap up, Brendan normally has a couple of questions he likes to ask everyone, so I'll let him take over with those.
All right.
Do you like sweet tea?
Yes, as much as possible.
My friend lives down south, and he's always yammering on about fucking sweet tea. Come up with, if you could like open up for anybody, like live music, do like this like big on like if you could like recruit musicians and stuff. Who would you who would you have on there?
Man, the first two people that come to mind right now is Sun and a friend of mine named Tyshawn Sori. Tyshawn is this just like brilliant composer, jazz musician, friend of mine that I've known since we were kids. And I just think it would be so cool to take some of what he's doing and a band like Sun and something like, whether I opened for it or played with it or just wrote for them or something, I don't even care. But that's some stuff that I've been kind of obsessed with lately.
And then we touched a little bit on like musicians, but like who kind of got you into music in the get-go, like the very first
bands like that I was listening to as a kid?
Yeah.
Okay, gosh, we're gonna go back to embarrassing town. Well, I got a tape Walkman when I was in the first grade, and I believe, if I remember right, that this kid named Jimmy gave it to me, and I took my $5 or whatever, and I got a Billy Idol tape, if I remember right. But I mean, I had an aunt that was like super into Metallica and Guns N' Roses and stuff like that. And I found Pantera when I was in like, I don't know, 5th grade or something like that. I actually got into Down first somehow. And I remember, but like when I was in like 6th grade or something, and I bought Great Southern Trendkill or whichever one was out at the time.
Yeah.
And thinking, man, this guy, he's a fucking copycat for Down. He just sounds just like that guy. And yeah, all mainstream metal bands basically. That's what started it. And then I had a guitar teacher. I started playing guitar when I was in 8th grade. He was like, you're good, you have potential, you should not waste it on all this shit. You should join jazz band. And I did. And and so that just kind of sent me down that trail. And then so for jazz people, it'd just be Coltrane. When I was a kid, he was my biggest guy.
So did you have a favorite myth, American myth?
I
Like, I don't know. how like people like say like, oh, what was it? I can't. Paul Revere, you know, wasn't like the real guy that did all that stuff. Like it's just like myths like that, or like, are you like into like the more like witches and kind of stuff like that?
I feel like the easiest way to grapple with an idea of what America could be if you were to put it into mythology would be to listen to its folk music. So I realize that's a somewhat indirect answer, but I think if you wanted to grasp mythology in America, listen to the Delta blues people from the 1920s and 30s, listen to the old mountain music, listen to the cowboy songs from out west, read the Native American myths, read, that kind of stuff. As far as me having a favorite, I don't think that I would say that I do. I think it's just that the energy of it all for me is very animating, and it seems to conjure up some sort of part of me that feels very receptive to it, and within my imagination it seems to just spark an almost like limitless, how do I say this, movement of some sort within my mind that then is easily seems to lend itself to music, right? So like Primeval, that would be more, like you said, witches and mountainside witches and all this kind of Civil War, like here in the mountains, I wouldn't say that they came over as pagans, but they still had a lot of folk beliefs, folk superstitions, folk medicinal practices, and so on that were able to survive like a lot later than a lot of places, right? So that sort of feeling is kind of what permeates it. Whereas the sort of like 1970s country mythology, if you want to call it that, would be something that animates like Stumptail, for example. And like Spintria is like an intentional like warp between free jazz and the kind of cognitive dissonance of like doing that in Nashville, right? Okay. Like the most like just placid surface level city in the South, and probably in the top 5 of America. And then also just like the need to just take it a step further and attach it to some just bordering on arbitrary Roman mythological thing. Why? I don't even know. I don't even know how that came about. So, but yeah.
It's kind of funny that you base things on those two sort of areas, because I'm actually listening to podcasts on both topics right now simultaneously. So
really?
Yeah, I'll send you the links after this. I don't know if you might find them interesting if you end up checking them out or something. But they're both really, really in-depth stuff. Like that takes place right from. I mean, the American one goes right from Henry VIII through to present day, and it's incredibly in-depth. But it's actually focused on the shaping of American identity. That's the point of the series. And then the Roman one is just right from prior to the founding of Rome through to the fall of the empire, essentially. There's a lot of episodes of both, but I'll link you after this.
Yeah, that sounds great, man. That stuff is just like endlessly fascinating to me. Like I don't even care how many times I hear the same stories about the founding of Rome. It's just like, man, it's just so cool. Like, I mean, talk about like starting something when the world is in a period of shutdown. You know what I mean? Like I'm like trying to start a record label. Those guys founded Rome.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, if you listen to it, you'll hear all this stuff, because it has sort of like a different approach to Roman history, some of the other stuff I've read and listened to, where it doesn't paint them initially as this like enlightened conquering race that they sort of rose up into greatness, because they weren't. And if you listen to it, it'll kind of tell you they were these kind of backwards barbaric people that the rest of Italy hated, that were just really, really tough and very good at fighting, and had this religious fanaticism that was imbued in their culture.
Very good at kidnapping women too.
Yeah, that story's all in there. That covers all that. They had no women, so they stole the women from all the neighboring tribes. It's I'm not going to get started on that, because I could do like a 15-hour talk about that topic, so I'll save that for another time. But I'll take it back to Brandon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, we're almost at the time mark anyways, right?
Yeah. So basically, we'll just kick it over to you. And one last thing, just let everyone know where they can check the music out, and then I guess the next upcoming thing to watch out for.
All right. Yeah. So you can hear all the music at Moonlight Cypress Archetypes.bandcamp.com. It's also on YouTube. It's also on Spotify. That includes Vile Haint, Arcane Marrow, Existential Dread, Spintria, and Primeval Well. Upcoming now is Stumptail. That drops on September 20th, and that is kind of a sludgier, less black metal thing with a lot of doom, some stoner elements, definite Jerry Reed country influence. That drops on September 20th. And thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it. It's been great.
No, we'll definitely have you on again sometime, because I mean, you have so many projects, and the 6 to 12 months would be a whole other 11 albums or something to talk about. So
the more I do it, the easier it'll be to just get to my point. Like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I'm just such a fucking rambler. Like, I just get nervous. I'm like, oh my God, I don't even remember what I was just talking about.
It's no problem.
I never do these things. I always just am like, no, email only. I hate fucking talking, but I'm trying to get over that and come out of my shell a little bit.
Well, we appreciate you putting yourself out of the comfort zone and coming on the show.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. I really appreciate it.
The first couple times we were doing this, I remember just being like, whoa, what's going on here? Oh, wait.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You listen to your own voice, and it's a terrible shock.
It's
so funny, yeah.
Brendan and I didn't have any experience in like radio or any of that stuff, so it was definitely a.
And I meant to ask you about the new PR business thing, or whatever you're calling it.
Really I mean, I can talk about that for a little bit. Yeah. So that just started Monday.
You should include that. You should include it in this.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
like when you do your edits, you should put this in there, because I know a lot of people are going to be interested in it. I am too.
Awesome, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So basically, it's been a pipe dream of mine for a very long time. Ever since Cave Dweller kind of took off, I was like, there must be a way that I can kind of do more to make it sort of a way that I can make some money out of it. Not that I want to make money out of it, but I mean, if I can do something where this is my living to some extent, then that's the dream, because I love doing it. So that's how I feel. Yeah, I mean, PR was kind of the way I thought I would do it, because you kind of said this with yourself with the technology side of things. There's a lot of people out there who make absolutely phenomenal music that have zero tech skills with computers or like social media or any websites or any of that stuff. It's just it's a different world to them.
That's what I was trapped in for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you really make the effort to educate yourself on it, it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. And if I can be the guy who helps you connect your fantastic music with people out there who want to listen to it, then that's awesome. Because I'm not a musician. I play around with stuff. Like, I have like a little electronic project I play with on the side and stuff. But the way I want to get back is by helping people connect and get the stuff out there, get it to people who want to review it, get it to radio stations, get it to people in Facebook groups. You know what I mean? There's so many ways these days. It's one of those blessings we were talking about before, of the double-edged sword. If you can tap into the fact that potential is there, then it's not all bad. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to start from a point where I want to charge reasonable rates, because I'm new to the whole thing myself as well. And I don't think it's fair that I charge full prices that other PR firms who've been established for 5 or 10 years are charging. But also to some extent, I feel like some of those, I'm not going to say anything negative about anyone, but I feel like some firms really do kind of gouge people to some extent.
Sure. I mean, I think every artist, I can definitely name a few, and I won't, but that people, that I've known that have shelled out thousands of dollars and just got, jack shit out of it.
Exactly. And there are some people out there. Some of it I feel is, because I mean, I've been running Cave Dweller for a year now. I can't tell you how many promos I've received from other companies. And some of it I feel is people trying their best, but then just not doing it right. which I spent the last 12 months studying what not to do, but also been learning from a lot of good people who are really good at what they do and what to do. But there are definitely those out there who have the capability to be good at it, but just screw people over. I've heard some horror stories of people shelling out, like you said, thousands of dollars. Absolutely nothing happens. And then the person ghosts them.
I feel like that's like, the PR version of the record labels that are promising you everything and they like never even get the tapes made.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's like you see that shit all the time, man. It's everywhere.
It is. And it's so prevalent that, in fact, if you look at my website in the About section, or you look at my Facebook page, it's one of the first things I address is that I'm aware of that reputation for PR. And what I'm going to try and do to the best of my ability is never take on a client that I can't do something for. Because there's a lot of people out there who have very niche projects. And if I don't have like suitable connections for that nicheness, or I don't feel that I can benefit that person, I'm not going to take their money.
That's kind of how I felt when you asked me about the record label thing. Like, would I release other people's music? It's like, well, maybe. I would feel really responsible for them. You know what I mean? At least that album or whatever. And I wouldn't want to.
That's how I feel. A good owner would do. Yeah, feel responsible.
Exactly. It's not something I take lightly if someone puts their trust in me and their money and gives me their money, because I know how much people work to try and make their projects happen. You're not just screwing over someone financially, you're screwing over someone's dream. Because it's more than just like, it's not like you're buying like a sandwich or something from me. It's like, it's your art, it's your passion. You spend a lot of time and money on this. You know what I mean? And you're not just taking their money, you're tanking the possibility of how well that album could do. If it had the right connection.
That and just kind of contributing to the general decline of civilization as a whole, which I think is like what I was saying earlier about myself freaking out about existential things and whatever. It's, it's like, I don't really know like what this music is going to do or what this label is going to do in the long run or whatever, but I'm definitely like committed to not putting out shit, and contributing to the shittiness of an already in many ways shitty planet.
Right. I mean, well, it's the same idea as like just not writing like a shitty review, or like a negative review,
Yeah, we don't do that because there's so much crap out there and so much negativity that it's just not worth it. But I mean, what's the point? There's so much good music that needs coverage that isn't getting it while we're wasting time shooting or something.
Exactly. Right.
But I mean, with the client side of things for my business, I'm trying to be open-minded with genres and bands and stuff, because I'm only going to put out stuff that I personally enjoy. And whether that is high art or just something I find genuinely fun to listen to that I think other people would find fun to listen to. That's what I'm going to do. Because I mean, like the first band I've been working with, Nothing Is Real. It's a very artistic project, boundary pushing, experimental stuff. But the next artist I've been dealing with, I can't say too much because it's only just happening. I mean, we're in talks today. This contract's been sent out, but it's the exact opposite. It's fun music that makes me happy personally, and I think other people out there will find it to be the same.
Mm-hmm. That's a freedom that you'll have in that in your business though too. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be stuck only doing a certain kind of thing if you're going that direction. You know what I mean? Exactly.
I think it makes it gives you a bit of variety. It keeps it interesting, but also it's like it broadens your horizons and your connections as well. I mean, you're going to meet a lot of different people from different areas of the music industry if you do that sort of widespread. So I think, and all PR is, I mean, apart from the hard, the actual labor behind it, is a reputation and connections. That's it, really. That's all it is. That and the know-how to do like the graphic design and run the mailer campaigns and that sort of thing. But that's half of it.
Push all the buttons and typing all the words.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And dealing with all the non-responses.
Oh, yeah.
And not becoming depressed by them.
I mean, to some extent as well, like it's cynical to say this, but PR is to some extent a numbers game as well.
Yeah.
It's because people get hit with so much content on those who run sites. Like I can tell you myself, I get 250 emails a week some weeks. And I've got like 1,200 unread emails. And I'm not even going to try and catch up. I can't. It's not feasible. It's not possible. So it's an off chance that your stuff can be fantastic. That helps. The packaging and presentation can be fantastic, and that helps. But some of it is the right person seeing it at the right time. And it's sad to say that, but that's what some of it comes down to. It's like, that's why you have to send a couple of emails out over a period of a few months. You can't just send one and be like, I hope people like it, because there's a chance they won't even see it in their inbox.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, I've rambled enough, but that's the gist of it for me. Thanks for asking, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was curious about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a topic I'm going to talk more about over the coming months, but that's probably what I'll say at this point.
Cool.
Yeah. So for anyone listening, thanks for tuning in, and definitely go check out everything that's on Moonlight Cypress Archetypes and keep an eye out for upcoming projects. You should see some stuff on our site in the next few weeks regarding some the upcoming album. We can cut this out afterwards if you want, but did you want to sort of announce that we'll be doing the premiere or?
Yeah, we can. That was another thing I meant to fucking talk about and just forgot.
We got carried away with philosophy and existential topics.
All the existential shit. I do. It's a curse, man. It's just like my brain just goes there instantly. It's like I just like am up in the damn clouds with that shit all the time.
So keep an eye on our page. We will be premiering that album. The date hasn't been disclosed yet, but it will be coming up in the next few weeks. Yep. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and we'll have another interview next time.